Here we are, California State Railroad Museum, man. Let's take a pic. Okay, I made it. California State Railroad Museum. Hopefully my mic is okay. It's a strange day. It's really windy. It'll go sunny and then it'll get kind of overcast. So $12 to get in, right on. Here we go. Let's see if we can. Yeah. SkyRide Adventures. You wanted my email for my SkyRide Adventures. All right, I'm gonna have to do this kind of quick because I don't have much time. And I do a pretty thorough job. So my guess is that a lot of this artwork, since it's Chinese, and they pretty much built the railroad, is what this is paying homage to, and it's right in the beginning.
So what he does is he finds 4 businessmen here in Sacramento who have watched their business walk away because of the guy with the monopoly. So they listen to him, and they pony up $1,500 of their own money, and they begin the Central Pacific Railroad. We're going to be off and building our railroad, so let's go around here to the front of this locomotive. And those big 4 are Stanford, Crocker, Huntington, and Hopkins. So Crocker ran they called it an emporium, but the best way to describe it is a Costco today. That's the kind of store he ran. Stanford was working as a lawyer out of his brother's grocery store here in Sacramento. And Huntington and Hopkins ran a hardware store. The hardware store is right next door. Yeah, still. We moved it from K Street over here. So, the oldest thing that we have here in the museum is what's right behind me. The locomotive number 1, the Governor Stanford from the Central Pacific Railroad. It's original. It does not belong to the museum. Oh, wow. It's on permanent loan from Stanford University. As soon as Stanford University, it does. So as soon as Stanford University heard that we were going to have a railroad museum here, they said, "Great, I can free up some warehouse space." So they gave it to us in perpetuity. They can take back anytime they want, but we have to maintain it. So what we've done is we've reworked it to the way it would have looked in the late 1890s. This locomotive arrived on the fastest mode of transportation in its day, called a clipper ship. It left the port of Philadelphia, and in 127 days it was offloaded here. Do you want to do this?
False. don't believe that for a minute. Anyway, as he was saying, this is the Governor Stanford. It's named after Leland Stanford, who was both the president and the governor of the state, president of the railroad and governor of the state of California at the same time. They didn't worry about conflict of interest. The Act of 1862, the Railroad Act of 1862. Theodore Judah was not only an engineer, he was a lobbyist, and he was a darn good one. The Central Pacific sent him back.
Is he the one that found the gold?
No, that was a guy named John Marshall who found the gold. He found it in 1848. That started the gold rush, and that's what brought everybody, including Judah, to California.
January, right? January.
Yeah, January of 1848, up in Coloma. So we talked about the equipment, and by the way, all the steel parts, the spakes, the rails, the cars, the locomotives, started coming from the east. Collis Huntington, one of the big 4, set up basically a supply chain, brought all the stuff around the tip of South America. The rails and the granite for the road beds were local, but you need people to know the railroad, back then especially, because back then, no tunnel boring machines, no track laying machines, none of the modern equipment that you have now. It's basically by hand. They built the railroad by hand through the Sierra Nevada. That's one heck of an accomplishment.
How do you blow up the mountain?
Huh?
Like, how do you blow up the mountain and make a hole? Dynamite?
You didn't have dynamite, you had black powder, gunpowder. And what they would do is one guy would hold a big spike, the next guy would slam the sledgehammer into it, punch the spike in, turn the spike, slam the sledgehammer, do that about 3 or 4 times, pull out the hammer, pull out the spike, pack it with gunpowder. Stick a fuse in the gunpowder, light the fuse, boom. Rinse and repeat, over and over and over again. Dynamite wasn't invented until a few years later. They did use nitroglycerin, but it was exceedingly dangerous.
Yeah, it would be.
The stuff you've seen in the movies, you know, in the old Western movies about nitroglycerin blowing up, it's true. There was a load of nitro on the docks of San Francisco. It's very unstable. It blew up the whole dock. Chinese, they built the railroad. They came from this area called Guangdong province. That's what we call it today. Back then we called it Canton. The language they speak is Cantonese. They had come here to mine gold, but they were mistreated, both out in the mine fields and by the government. They were forced to pay a tax, a foreign miner's tax that others weren't. So they were available. The railroad originally hired, and I hope I'm not stepping on toes, but originally hired Irish workers. Well, the Irish workers were like the Chinese. They had originally come to California to mine for gold. They didn't come to build a railroad. So as soon as they earned enough money working on the railroad, they disappeared. Bought their mining equipment, probably from Huntington and Hopkins, and then disappeared into the mountains to go to either gold mine or over into Nevada to mine for silver. So they were unreliable. Well, Charles Crocker was in charge of building the railroad. He wasn't getting his railroad built. And this was in about 1864. Just wasn't happening. And so he came up with an idea. Some believe he got the idea from his servant, one of his servants. A Chinese fellow named An Li suggested, why don't you try Chinese? So Crocker went to his construction manager, a fellow named James Strobridge. Strobridge said no. Said they're too small, they're too weak. They can't build, they're not good enough to build this. Legend has it that Crocker replied, who do you think built the Great Wall of China?
Oh, yeah.
Strobridge lost the argument, went to Auburn, met a man named Hunhua, hired 50 Chinese as an experiment, and the rest is history. By the beginning of 1865, 2,000 Chinese were working on the railroad, and by the end of the railroad, by the completion of the railroad in May of 1869, as many as 20,000 Chinese total worked on the railroad.
From beginning to end?
From beginning to end. As many as 9,000 at any given time would be working on the railroad. First of all, hiring the Chinese turned out to be a brilliant business idea.
No
Why?
turnover, it seems like.
Yeah. Why? First of all, they were very reliable.
Very reliable, yeah.
Secondly, they were healthier. Their diet was healthier. The white workers ate boiled everything, boiled beef, boiled potatoes, boiled this, boiled that. And when they were thirsty, they would just drink water straight out of the streams. Well, those streams were full of giardia and dysentery. So it would affect the white workers' health. The Chinese, on the other hand, they like their own diet. Can't blame them. Rice, noodles, chicken, fish, and tea. They drank tea instead of the water out of the stream. Well, how do you make tea? You boil the water. What happens when you boil the water? You kill the bugs.
Kill the germs.
They were also cleaner than the white workers. The white workers couldn't believe it when every night they'd see the Chinese workers washing their clothes, taking baths. They said, oh, what are they doing? Well, they were healthier. They were, as I said, they were cheaper too. They weren't slave labor. Please don't misunderstand me. They weren't slave labor, but they got paid not as much as the white workers. And again, they were reliable. and they worked through horrendous working conditions. We have on display there some of what they did. They had to climb the rocks to set the gunpowder. You can see them hauling up a barrel of gunpowder, black powder, where they would drill the holes to blast the rock. And they'd have to climb up the rocks that way. Very dangerous. But what that display does not show is snow. And in 1866 and 1867, it snowed and snowed and snowed. And the result was that the Chinese would have to basically tunnel through the snowbanks to get to the rock, tunnel through the rocks. It was very dangerous. Unfortunately, camps got swept away in avalanches. Strobridge wrote a note about, unfortunately, the next spring, finding Chinese workers frozen in place. It was very, very difficult. We do not know how many were lost, but a good many number of Chinese were lost. But they worked on. They built the railroad. It took them 4.5 years to build the western half of the railroad. And it was their...
From completion, from start to end, how many years was the railroad? Like what year to what year?
Here's the dates. January 1863 here in Sacramento to May 10th, 1869. 6 years.
That's a long time.
Think about this.
Big long
We
process.
started high-speed rail here in this state in January of 2015. Not yet built. Come with me.
9 years.
Leland Stanford. He was a wholesale grocer. And yes, he is that. He built the university in the honor of his son who died at a very young age. So yeah, Leland Stanford Junior University, that Leland Stanford. And then last...
So it's a private university.
Yes, it is. And really expensive. If you can get in though, damn good school.
Yeah.
And then last, Charles Crocker, the guy who was assigned to build the railroad. He was the boss of Strobridge. After crossing the mountains, it took about 3 years to cross the mountains. Once they got into the deserts, they flew. The Chinese railway workers for the Central Pacific laid 10 miles of track in one day. This is by hand. Remember this. This is all by hand. This record has not yet been beaten.
No,
Even to this day.
9,000 men at the same time, huh?
Well, probably at around then, probably 3,000 or 4,000.
3,000 or 4,000.
Yeah,
Even more.
because they come and they go. They would come and they would go. The railroad would add men and lose men like they do today for what they needed. Okay, let's go around the corner. So I stop here. This is the joining of the two railroads, the driving of the Golden Spike in 1869 on May 10th of 1869. This is one of the most famous photographs in U.S. history. It was taken by Andrew J. Russell for the Union Pacific Railroad. On the left is the Central Pacific. On the right is the Union Pacific. This is Samuel Montague. He succeeded Judah as chief engineer after Judah died in Panama, going through Panama. This is Grenville Dodge, the chief engineer for the Union Pacific. They spent, I don't know how many people spent years trying to join the two railroads into one company. It finally happened in 1996. Union Pacific.
30 years later.
1996, 130 years later.
130 years later.
When Union Pacific gobbled up Southern Pacific in 1996. But anyway, this picture was taken after the Golden Spike. And this is the last rails are in here. Probably, even though Stanford drove the ceremonial last spike, the guy who probably drove the true last spike was a Chinese railway worker. What Stanford did was he drove a Golden Spike with a silver spike wall through a pre-drilled hole in a fancy top. And then after the ceremony, they took all that up and built the real thing. When Stanford drove the last spike, there was a telegraph there. The telegraph was the internet of its day. And when he drove the spike, the telegrapher wrote one word, done. Well, that meant the railroad was done, but that was the biggest understatement you could make because the changes in the United States as a result of the building of the railroad were just getting started. Just want to let you know that the railroads changed time. Changed time. Before the railroads, time was basically the sun came up, and the sun went down, and if you had a clock or watch, you set it by where the sun was in the sky. Railroads couldn't do that. It created all kinds of problems for scheduling. So in 1883, the railroads created standard time. The 4 time zones that we know today across the United States were created in 1883 by the railroads, and it was called standard railroad time. And basically, as a result of the railroads, they ended up creating universal time zones around the globe. But in 1883, the railroads created standard time here in the U.S. Come to us from the Nevada State Rail Museum. This thing is beat up, but it is one of the most important exhibits we have in the building. This is called the Commissioner's Car. It was built as a private car for Charles Crocker, one of the big four. They call it the Commissioner's Car because the commissioners who had to inspect the building of the railroad got to use this car for their inspections. Obviously, the Big Four made sure that the government officials got the best car to ride around in. The significance of this car to us is very simple. This is the car that took Leland Stanford and the Gold Spike to Promontory Summit. This car was at the driving of the Gold Spike. You'll see photographs of it in the cabinet down there. It has not been restored, as you can see. It's beat up. The holes are not bullet holes, thank God. They're woodpecker holes. But people also like this car because it's a movie star. Yeah, it was part of Paramount Studios, and people who made movies with this car included Kenny Rogers and Elvis Presley. Yeah.
You know what movie?
No, I don't. And the board back, the electronic board and the wood frame down there may tell you. I don't know. All I know is one time I was talking about this, and one of the guests goes, "Wasn't this car with Elvis Presley?" Yes, it was. So you know, I talk about Leland Stanford. They talk. That's whatever. Let's move on down here, and I'll point out some of the exhibits, and then if you have questions, feel free.
Some fancy things here.
It shows you how dangerous railroad work was. He's setting that coupler by hand. So he's standing between the cars, moving locomotive and car. One of the symbols of being a railroad worker was how many fingers you lost. Yeah, they did.
Yeah, old school. A little dangerous there, buddy. Alright, let's keep up with them.
Gold Coast ended its life as a private rail car owned by 2 people named Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg. On the other side is a platform. You can look in the car. It is glorious. I mean, it's this Victorian splendor run amok. Yes, exactly. Yes. The car is important to us because we hosted a dinner for Governor Ronald Reagan on that car.
Here at the museum?
No, before the museum was built. In order to get it built, the dinner was successful because you're standing on the success. The refrigerator car, called a reefer. You can walk through that car as well. Cars like that led to what we call the second gold rush. Fresh fruit and vegetables. Created the agricultural industry here in California. Fruit trees, orange trees. Changed the diet of people back east. Instead of eating out of cans, they ate fresh fruit. Okay, way down at the end of the building. We must go down there. We have the silver one. On the other side of the silver one is a big green car. It's called a Pullman car. It's a sleeping car. You can walk through it. It's set up to like you're on a train at night. My joke is that it's the one exhibit in the building where you can actually go for a train ride without leaving the building. The silver car is the Cochiti. It was the dining car for the Santa Fe Super Chief, Santa Fe's best train. The car itself is gorgeous. If you like Art Deco architecture, and if you like railroad china, best exhibit of railroad china you'll see in my view anyway. Behind you is the railroad post office car. Yes, you can walk through that car as well. Okay, last but not least, that is the CP Huntington, the logo. That is the third locomotive of the Central Pacific Railroad, and is the first locomotive of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The monster behind you, 4294, is the last steam locomotive of the Southern Pacific purchase new. So you have the beginning and the end of steam of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Now you see why I call that a monster, because when you turn the corner, yeah, oil. It's an oil-fired steam locomotive. When you turn the corner, you will see 124 feet and 350 tons of steel sitting there. At the end of the locomotive is the twin of the Gold Spike driven at Promontory Summit. When Stanford went to Promontory, the jeweler who made the spike actually made two. Made the spike and a twin. We have the twin. And it is gold. It's real gold. Oh yeah. And it's an identical twin to the spike driven at Promontory with one exception. The spike driven at Promontory has the wrong date, as May 8th, 1869. We have the correct date, May 10th, 1869. Why the difference? The leaders from the Union Pacific were late getting to the ceremony because their train had been held up by track workers who hadn't been paid in months. So the track workers said, you want your train to move, we want to be paid. So they got paid. And we're talking a lot of money, 150 grand in 1869. That's a lot of dough. It's probably
Millions today.
Yeah, it's probably, I'm going to say maybe $6 million, $5-6 million they were. Anyway, again, my name is Craig. Thank you for joining.
Really enjoyed it. The docent was cool. I recommend definitely taking that tour if you can. It goes a little more in depth. So lots to learn and lots to see.